What's up, my plant lovers? Devin is here, and today I want to talk about some of my favorite climbing and trailing indoor houseplants. If you haven't seen my video where I did a whole makeover of this room in order to create some structure for my climbing plants, go check that video out. It's kind of fun, it's kind of inspirational. But in the process of redoing this whole room, I did a lot of research, a lot of growing, a lot of testing and trialing of different climbing plants to determine which ones would fill out and create the coolest energy inside my houseplant jungle. So in this video, I'm going to talk about the plants that I actually chose to climb up the walls, as well as a few other ones that I have just kind of hanging around, get it, hanging around, around the rest of my home. Okay, so first up is this beautiful guy. This is the mini Monstera, the Rhaphidophora tetrasperma. This is my #1 choice if you're ever trying to create a beautiful green wall quickly. Easily the fastest growing climbing plant that I have ever grown. Now, this plant comes from Southeast Asia. It is a member of the Araceae aroid family. So it has that iconic kind of arrow-shaped foliage, and it has this slight, it's kind of like a half fenestration because it only has like the split leaves, and that's why they call it the mini Monstera, because it does look pretty close to a Monstera. It just never gets any bigger than this. A couple other things that I love about this as a climbing plant is that it's very easy to propagate. It grows exceptionally fast, and it creates a very nice kind of dense look, which is quite hard to achieve from climbing plants inside the home. And I also just absolutely love and adore that every single leaf seems to be perfect. You know, there's other plants out there that when they're climbing, some will look good, some won't look great. This one is a winner every single time. Now, in terms of the cons of this plant, it is very vigorous and it will outgrow spaces quite quickly. Could be a pro, could be a con. Also, it does have the tendency to bore into the walls with its aerial roots, which, you know, if you're living at home, in your home, maybe it doesn't matter, but if you're living in an apartment, be careful, be aware that that can happen. And the last con about the mini Monstera is that when you do propagate them, they do take a very long time to create roots. And then once you transplant them into soil, they have a very long kind of pause before they start to grow again. But then once they do start growing, they will take off. So that is one thing to note. Compared to other aroids that I propagated, this one is quite slow. Now, in terms of how I actually use it on this wall, so I love it. I put these slats in to kind of just create some visual structure. And what I do is I put little tacks, little thumbtacks into the wall. And then I have, you know, every time I eat bread, I keep those little twist ties, and I will twist tie the stem to a tack. And that allows me to move the tacks as I need. It allows me to kind of move the twist ties as needed, and it doesn't create any sort of constriction in its growth, so the plants can actually just flow as they need to without being restricted. So that's been my favorite way of actually kind of styling and training this plant to grow up and along the wall as I want. Now, the next plant on my climbing wall is this beautiful guy. This is the Peru Monstera, or the Monstera karestenianum, also part of the aroid Araceae family. Now, I chose this one because I love its thick, leathery foliage. This has some of the most substantial foliage of any plant in my home, in my houseplant jungle. This plant has been through a lot. When I used to live back on the West Coast in Seattle, I had a friend that was staying at my house, and while she was staying there, she let this plant die, practically die. I had to cut it back all the way 3 years ago, and now it is beautifully covering this wall back and forth. And I just love how it has a very graceful energy about it. It is very easy to train because the stems are quite, you know, they're quite pliable, easy to move around as needed, and that's huge. Not all climbing plants are really easy to move around when they've outgrown their spaces. This one, as it gets longer and taller, I keep bringing it down so that it can crisscross back and forth, and it does so quite effortlessly. Now, the one thing I don't like about this plant is there are quite long internodes between the foliage. That is basically the space between one leaf and the next. We call that an internode. Because they're so long, it does create a bit of gaps between the foliage and leaves a little bit of openness. So for better or worse, that's just the way this plant is. Now, as this plant grows bigger and bigger, some of the older leaves will start to get larger and larger and larger, which is also pretty darn cool. So you have a variety of large and small leaves emanating from the same stem up and down the stem. So that's very cool. And I have it growing in a mixed container with some of this beautiful Tradescantia pallida, I believe, this purple guy. And they grow quite well together in this little white pot. So this is a great choice if you're looking for more of a kind of a rambling growth habit. It would be awesome in a hanging structure. If you have some sort of like hanging thingy like I do right here that I made, this would be a beautiful overflowing plant to grow in those situations. Of course, great for climbing up the wall as well. So the next guy on the wall is this beautiful plant. This is the Rhaphidophora discursiva, or the dragon's tail. Now I chose this one because this one creates huge foliage. Now it creates one kind of thick, long stem and just sort of emanates back and forth, up and down. This guy is getting very thick. It's almost a half an inch around this main central stem, but the leaves will get quite large as they grow. However, you need a lot of space in order for these to really get to their full maturity. So if you don't have a pretty tall wall or a lot of space for them to grow, they'll never really get to be that cool. Okay, of course they're gonna be cool, but they're never gonna get their huge, long, dragon tail-like leaves, which mine are just now kind of starting to take on that vibe. And one downside, kind of like that Peru Monstera, is that it doesn't produce a ton of leaves, but it does produce very robust, showy leaves when it does create new foliage. And this has been a rapid grower. I started this from a little 4-inch pot about a year and a half ago, and now it's gotta be 12 feet tall if you back and forth all of this kind of stuff. And so this has been a very wonderful plant to watch just take off. None of the plants on this plant wall are getting a lot of additional supplementary lighting. I do have them with a little bit of light, but just kind of to illuminate the room more than provide substantial light for the plant. So that's also another thing to take note of, that these are not like huge sun-loving climbing plants. So that's also very important. This foliage is thick, it's substantial, it feels good in your hands. And this is definitely the like showpiece specimen plant of the climbing wall. Definitely will be once it's filled out even more. So next on the list is my Hoya publicalix. Now, this is the only Hoya that I have growing in my houseplant jungle at the moment. And the reason is because out of all the Hoyas that I've grown before, this one has the ability to produce lots and lots and lots of new stems. So I have new stems that are constantly emanating, and I'm finding them growing just kind of all over the place. This one adds the jungle vibe for sure, because it just kind of, I found it growing in and amongst my grow light the other day. It's kind of weaving in and amongst the Peru Monstera and the dragon's tail. It really will just kind of grow onto anything. So if you're looking for a climbing plant that has the ability to really just take off and find its way in and around without you having to really do any sort of training at all. I don't need to use any tacks or twist ties for this guy. He's finding a way to climb everywhere. Well then, Hoya publicalix is a great option. Now the foliage is very thick and leathery. It feels like it maybe is it a semi-succulent? I'm not even sure, but it feels incredible. And it has the feeling that tells you that it's very pest resistant, disease resistant, and it just resists any sort of problems because it's such a substantial foliage and it really just holds its own. So it's a very low maintenance plant. Very drought tolerant in terms of houseplants. This is one of the plants that I water the least in my houseplant jungle, and it's always doing a-okay. It's growing on the other side of this wall in my kitchen, and just started taking off over there as well. I have it in a pretty small pot. This is like an 6 or 8 inch pot right here, and the plant is getting enormous, and this is all it really needs. I rarely fertilize it. The foliage always looks perfect. It's always producing new foliage. I'm in love with this Hoya publicalix. And just look at how it just crisses and crosses. I started it with this beautiful little trellis here, and then once it kind of filled out that trellis, then I just started to just let it go free. So with the trellis, I just kind of curled it back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, up and down. the trellis structure until I decided that the trellis looked full enough. Now I've had it for about 2 years, have not had any flowers yet, but I am hopeful that it will flower soon, so fingers crossed, but I don't really care. It provides, it does more than its fair share of bringing beauty to my houseplant jungle and to my houseplant jungle wall. So next is this beautiful Syngonium podophyllum. Now this is the Albo variegata. Now I have this kind of growing, climbing up my bookshelf thing. So it's not really on the wall, but I think it's definitely a part of the climbing energy in my room. And the reason I love this, out of any variegated plant I've ever seen, this beautiful Albo variegata Syngonium is by far like the cleanest, the purest, the most beautiful variegation I have ever seen, and I absolutely love it. However, they do have a tendency to revert back to the all green, so that is one thing to take note of. If you do have a section that is beautifully variegated, I recommend propagating it because they are very easy to propagate. I have a few of these all around my home, and they propagate very quickly, they establish their root systems very quickly, and they grow very quickly. They're always producing new foliage. This guy just opened up yesterday. It feels incredible. If you're not touching your plants a lot yet, please start doing it. It's one of the best things about growing plants. This is a very forgiving plant. I have noticed that sometimes it will go through growth spurts where it grows a lot and then it kind of chills out for a little bit and then it starts to growing a lot again. And really what I find is that if you provide it something to climb on, it will definitely start to take off. I think this is a good candidate for things like moss poles or for climbing up something that's a little bit more structural like this like metal pole that I have here. And the way that I do it, I just use those twist ties and just twist them, you know, I have just one twist tie right here and no more along this entire stem. And that's really all it needs. You just want to give it just enough support to keep it up. You don't want to give it like, go here and here and here and here and here. Just enough to let it start to take off on its own. Now over here in this pot with my tetrasperma, I have, this was an Albo variegata Syngonium, but it reverted back to the all green like I was saying, but it still looks beautiful. This foliage, you know, these are also aroids, part of the Araceae family, so it has that arrow-shaped foliage like we've been seeing, and it's just a wonderful plant that just is starting to climb along my wall. This one does not produce tons of stems successively like that Hoya publicalix. It really just has one main stem, so you will want to propagate this, and you can plant a few into a container to get a really nice full look. And this is also going to be a great kind of, it does, certain varieties of Syngonium will create more of a clumping habit, which will be perfect for a more of a hanging situation, but the podophyllum I find tends to be best suited for climbing. Well, no houseplant jungle would be complete without one pothos at least. Now this is the Epipremnum aureum, Green Pothos, just like the super standard. This is, I think, also known as like the most common houseplant in the world, but there's a reason why. It's a set it and forget it plant. It's a great you can climb it, you can use it as a climber to train it up, but I think it looks great as an overflowing hanging plant better than a climber, and it really handles the low light, low water. If you're a beginner looking for something easy and you're watching this video, this is what you want to get, just a Green Pothos. It does do its job. It fills out areas where you are planting it, it's very easy to propagate, and it really just looks good all the time. So I really can't film a video about climbing and hanging plants without at least mentioning a pothos. Well, and one last bonus plant would be my Philodendron micans. Now this is up in our bonus room, and you can see I have it hanging from this hanging structure that I built. And I love this plant because it has this really nice velvety foliage. And what's really cool about this plant is that the leaves will actually look different, young growth versus older growth. Some will be velvety, some won't be velvety. Some will be reddish, some won't be reddish. So it has a lot of unique variability, which makes this plant super interesting. And in terms of a hanging and climbing plant, it does both quite well. It has a little bit of a lazy, floppy growth habit, but you know, it suits this need pretty well. And it is a very effortless plant. This is like pretty far away from a window. It has very low light, and yet it's been doing very well in this corner, and it fills out this corner very substantially. It is a wonderful hanging plant for its trailing growth. And with that, I think we'll conclude this video about climbing and hanging plants that probably deserve a good spot in your home, in your houseplant jungle. Now, if you are looking for a fun video about how to best propagate your vines and your climbing plants, go check this video out. It's all about this wonderful technique of propagation called French propagation, perfect for climbers and viners and hanging plants. And if you found this video enjoyable or helpful, don't forget, put the little like button on there and consider subscribing to our channel. We are producing new, fun, plant-related content every single week so that we can grow our plant community, share our experiences, and just enjoy having a life surrounded by plants. Anyways, thank you guys for joining me here on Plant Vibrations with me, Devin. I'll catch you soon. Ciao.